Well, welcome everybody to May 2023 Shumla Lunch and Learn. So happy to have you. So excited to talk about this program that we truly love, the Shumla Scholars Program. Today we have Rudy Banney, who is going to be presenting to us. He has been managing under the tutelage of Karen Steelman, the Shumla Scholars Program for the last 2 semesters. And it's really been an amazing group of kids, and Rudy's done a truly fantastic job of guiding them and teaching them about this incredible resource in their backyard and the science that we use to study it. So I will turn it right over to you, Rudy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and share my screen. My name is Rudy Banney. I am Shumla's archaeological chemist, usually working in the radiocarbon dating lab, but also, as Jessica said, heading up the Shumla Scholars Program this year. So it's been an amazing experience. Very excited to share all about it with you as we talk about it today. Before I really talk about what we've done this year, and I do really want to focus more specifically even on this past semester, but of course talking about the whole year. Before I can do that, I really want to talk about what the program is, why we do it, what it's looked like in the past. So Shumla's mission, I mean, it's right there in the name, Shumla Archaeological Research and Education Center, right? It's been a big part of who we are as an organization for the past 25 years since its founding, right? And that has taken many different forms. It's looked like a lot of different things, but regardless, education is one of our kind of core tenets. You can find this part of our mission statement on our website. And I'd like to point out or really highlight the students and teachers aspect here. That's kind of what we're looking at today. So the Shumla Scholars Program specifically is just kind of one element of this. We have other things, we have treks, we have other outreach going on, but looking at the Scholars Program as that functions under education. So looking at the past, looking a little bit of history, the Scholars Program was first started in 2014 in its present form. So it's been going on about 9 years, very cool stuff. And for anyone who's not aware, essentially, here in Comstock, it's a very small town. If you haven't visited, not a lot going on, but what we do have going on is pretty great. There is one school, it's a K through 12 school, Comstock ISD. And so the Scholars Program is we will work with some of the seniors at Comstock and just teach them all about what we do at Shumla, and more importantly, just the archaeology and the world right here in their backyard, kind of like Jessica was saying. And a big part of that is having some sort of project or something that they can have a hand in and a goal to achieve, so they can feel that accomplishment, and they learn all sorts of new skills, they gain all sorts of experience, and just have generally some really cool opportunities. And so since we started this program, we've had dozens of students, which might not seem like a lot, but again, very small town. The senior class this year was, I think, 14 students, 6 of whom were in the program because, as I have been told, 6 is the maximum number of students they can fit in their car that they use to drive them around to and from like the office and whatnot. So we were limited to 6 students, but had a great time. But yeah, over the years, dozens of students and some really incredible projects throughout the past 9 years. Some of which, just to go over really briefly, we've had this awesome greenhouse project. Dr. Phil Daring here kind of helped lead this, along with, I think, Vicky and Jared Roberts. But they had this awesome project where they had the scholars do all this work, kind of surveying the land, figure out a good place for it, build the foundation, build up this greenhouse, and then maybe most importantly, actually use it. It was a functioning greenhouse that the school had access to right behind the school for, I believe, 8 years, until unfortunately a really bad storm took it down. And it has yet to be rebuilt, but hopefully soon, maybe one day. But this was a really cool project, give them some hands-on experience doing this kind of thing. We've also had this huge cemetery project that actually spanned multiple years. Some interesting photos here. So because it spanned multiple years, there were kind of multiple groups of scholars working on it, but they did all sorts of really cool work, making really detailed maps of the cemetery here in Comstock and taking really detailed notes, doing all sorts of outside research, talking to living relatives and descendants of people buried here. They got to use some really cool instruments too. Aside from kind of like surveying and whatnot, they here in this lower left photo are using LiDAR, so light detection and ranging, to kind of make a bit of a map of the area, looking down, penetrating into the earth. And I think they actually potentially found a couple maybe unmarked graves using that method. So really cool high-tech instrument here. They, in this middle photo, are using a portable X-ray fluorescence. So maybe not the most vital thing, something they needed to do for this project, but it's really cool that they got the chance to do it anyway. And then processing all that data in the lab. And once again, you know, all of this kind of working towards an end goal. They had a project. And so ultimately, all this work they put in over these years led to the Comstock Cemetery becoming a historic Texas cemetery in 2017. So huge accomplishment there. We recently had a bit of a kind of commemoration of a little event down at the cemetery, and so it's cool that, you know, it's recognized. So good stuff. So that is all past scholars, to give you an idea of the context of what the program is and how it has functioned before. This year's scholars. So I was here with Shumla about 3 years ago, and I was just an intern at the time, and I got to get a little bit of a glimpse of the scholars program. That year, they actually helped build our plasma oxidation instrument, which I don't want to show because I don't want to spoil anything yet, but it was really cool to see. But so essentially, that was my whole exposure. So when I was hired on full-time about a year ago, and it, you know, was like, oh, okay, Shumla Scholars project, that's all yours now. I dove in head first, not entirely sure, you know, what to do with it, and I'm pretty proud of how it ended up. I took it in as far as I know, maybe a little bit of a different direction to start with. But so I knew going in that, you know, of course, as always, I really wanted to focus on the art, the archaeology, and the science of what we do at Shumla in this region, the Lower Pecos. And so I thought the best way to break that up would be to do one semester completely on the archaeology, one semester completely on the science or the chemistry, and of course, you know, weaving them back and forth and hinting at chemistry and then referring back to archaeology and making sure it's holistic, but kind of keeping them, for the most part, just solid, you know, curriculum blocks, I guess. So the first semester, the fall semester, we focused on archaeology. And so through this, at least in my high school experience, I don't think we ever talked about archaeology. So I figured the students have probably seen like maybe Indiana Jones or National Treasure, more likely, things like that. And that might have been their only kind of exposure to the field. So more than anything, I wanted to just talk about what is archaeology? How do we know what we know based on the material record and historical documents and all sorts of different things. So that was kind of our foundation. And then from there, moving into more, you know, away from like the theory and history of archaeology and into actual archaeology, starting very broad kind of foundation with this human migration to the Americas, and then getting narrower and narrower, focusing more and more with migration into the Lower Pecos Canyonlands, talking about the ancient lifeways here, you know, what people ate, where they lived, how they hunted and gathered food, and just how they lived. And of course, we are Shumla. We're going to talk about the rock art. And so this was kind of our general flow for that semester. But this is just a couple little cutouts from some slides and activities we've done to give you an idea of this kind of thing, looking at how the changing environment kind of assisted, or maybe in some cases forced, movement through the Americas, and how that kind of led to different living conditions. We got a little timeline of rock art styles. And then these top two images, this was a really fun activity. So throughout the semester, again, they've been learning about the lifeways, what people ate, how they hunted, how they gathered, you know, what kind of tools they used, all that stuff. And so I made these little fake site drawings, just completely made up sites. They don't exist, but they're based on real ones. And I handed them out, and all the students had to, look at these and say, oh, okay, this is where they slept, and this is where they prepared food, and this is what they were doing in this location, and they may have buried their dead here. And it was really cool to see them apply the information that they've been learning in a more almost like pseudo archaeological, research context. So really cool to give them a little taste of what we'd be doing later in a bit of a different context. But so in doing so, they did all sorts of great presentations. Again, like Jessica was saying, they're all really bright students. They did such a good job. They really caught on. And a lot of what we did throughout this semester was kind of them learning things individually and sharing it with the group. And they did a great job helping each other out. But it was not all fun and games. We did serious work too. We had a whole day throwing atlatls and darts. And so here you can see we started out the day. They just had these spears that they threw by hand to give them an idea how that works. And then we transitioned over to using atlatls. For anyone who's unfamiliar, an atlatl is essentially a wooden stick with a notch at the end that you can fit a spear onto. And it extends your arm. And it makes your throws more accurate, more powerful, a great hunting tool. And so, they got to see the difference between just throwing a spear by hand and using the atlatl, and they all became dangerously good at using them by the end of the day. It was very fun. While we were learning about hunting and lifeways, we took a trip to the Bank and Trust in Del Rio, which has this awesome little exhibit about the Lower Pecos and all sorts of great artifacts there that were collected and donated to the museum. So they got to read all about these things and see pictures of them in books. And then we came to this and they saw them in person. And then, we didn't stop there. That same day, we went to the Val Verde County Library and went to this talk given by the inimitable Jack Johnson with NPS. And Jack's amazing. He made all these little replica artifacts, essentially, these baskets and rabbit sticks and atlatls and darts. And so, the students, again, they went from reading and seeing pictures of these things to seeing them through the glass, the actual things. And now they're like handling replicas of these things. And I think that was a really great opportunity for them to really get hands-on in a way. And the hands-on experience just continued as we had the fantastic Missy Harrington join us one day to make some paint. So traditionally, this paint would likely have been made using like animal fat from bone marrow and plant sap, as well as mineral pigments. We used lard from the grocery store and dish soap and also mineral pigments, but it was a little easier to get a hold of those things. And the students, again, had a great time mixing up these paints, all different colors, testing out different mixtures, different amounts of things, seeing how that affected the color, the consistency, the quality. And ultimately, they all got to paint their own little figures and made an absolute mess doing it, but we all had a really great time, and they got to take them home and keep them as a little keepsake. And so that making the paint was really just to transition into learning about the rock art. And so we took several field trips to rock art sites. Here you can see we went to Seminole Canyon State Park. We went to Fate Bell and VV75. Seminole Canyon also has a little replica earth oven, which again, they'd been learning about these things, reading about them. And so they finally got to see, one in real life. Very cool experience. But more than anything, they just got to see the rock art. I mean, that's what we're here for, right? So they had a really great time looking at that and reading it and really like feeling the impact of it. I think one of the best rock art site field trips that we took was going to the White Shaman site. So we coordinated with the Whitty. We got the chance to go out here, and it was just a phenomenal experience. We got there, we let the students all take a look and just really take it in, explore the panel for themselves. After that, I shared the Weechol myth that is related to the narrative being portrayed on the panel, which, if you're curious, you can read about in Dr. Carolyn Boyd's book, The White Shaman Mural. That's exactly where I pulled it from to read to the students here. But it was really cool to see them hear the myth and then look at the panel and the figures and kind of make connections and see, what could be representing what and how it's related to the other figures, and put all the pieces together like that. But we did not go just for fun, just to look at things. We also had them do some work, get some experience doing some archaeological research. So you can see they got clipboards in a lot of these. We handed them all actual rock art site research forms, and they all picked a figure on the panel. And step one was to sketch the figure. They all did a really great job, different levels of art skills, but they all still did phenomenal. They drew the figure and then filled out all this data about different attributes. So, what shape is the head? Is there any center styling? Is there piloerection? What color is it? Are there antlers? Any adornments? All these things that we look for in the field. And they got to, play the part of the researcher and do some data recording. And so you can see here they have their drawings, and some of them are off the picture, unfortunately, but some maybe you can make the connection of, there's the moon goddess, and here's the little torch bearer, a couple upside down guys. But they did a great job. And I think more than anything, them being able to go out and see the rock art for themselves was just an impactful experience, even beyond the educational aspect of it. I think the two things I heard most often, and I'm pretty sure this is true kind of throughout the years, not just exclusive to this class, is that they didn't realize the significance or the meaning behind the rock art here, or even beyond that, they didn't know it was here in the first place. And so being able to kind of share that with them, and this history of the land and all that that entails, has been absolutely incredible. And we've had the pleasure of having a number of reporters and journalists come down who are curious about the scholars, or curious about Shumla in general, and they've got to speak with the students. And it's just always really cool to hear them talk about their experiences and how much they've gotten out of this aspect of the program. So that is the fall semester, our first semester together, archaeology. Now we're getting to the good stuff. I'm kidding. It was all good stuff. This is just what I really want to focus on, because this has been their big project. So again, every year the scholars have had their project, right? It was the greenhouse. It was the cemetery. They've also made an earth oven. I think one year they did baseline documentation for a site. So they've always had a project. So far, up until this point, it's just kind of been learning and engaging with the environment all around. But the spring semester is when our project kicked in. To get to that, though, we had to do a little bit more kind of foundational information, some regular kind of style teaching. The interesting thing here is, again, I wanted to focus on the science, focus on the chemistry. As I have been told by the students themselves, when they were taking their normal high school chemistry class, it was at the height of the pandemic. And so it was not an ideal learning situation. People really hadn't figured out the best way to communicate, over whatever methods they were using. And so when we were going over a lot of these things, they knew a good bit of it. A lot of it was kind of, they just needed a refresher, but there was a good amount where it was essentially them learning for the first time. But regardless, I wanted to start with a big foundation, and then kind of narrow our focus. So we started just generally with this evolution of scientific knowledge. Where did chemistry come from? How do we know what we know? What exactly is an atom? What is an element? What is an isotope? Kind of, again, narrowing our focus. Eventually getting to the basics of radioactivity. And then, I don't know, hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. Our next step was the fundamentals of radiocarbon dating. Very important to what we do at Shumla. So again, I've got some little blurbs from some of the slides I've shown them, just to give you an idea of what they're looking at. The evolution of our concept of the atom. What are elements? What is radiation? What are half-lives? And all of this, again, was just to make sure we're all on the same page. Everyone has the same foundation for our project, which this year was processing actual paint samples. So, I think past year's projects they've all been incredible experiences, great opportunities, hands-on things, gaining new skills, learning new things. This, though, I think has been an extremely unique experience. we are the only lab in the world doing what we do. And so just that alone gives these students this amazing opportunity to gain some really unique skills and experience. But more than that, it's lab experience, which not everyone can get very easily. And it's making a real kind of impact on our research and the things that we study. So essentially, Shumla had been given a bunch of samples from a site in Argentina, and we had been kind of busy with a lot of other things. We've been waiting for the right time to work on these. And so when the Scholars program was happening, Dr. Steelman approached me and said, hey, this could be a great opportunity, give them something real to do, an actual project for them to do that has real meaning, and help us take care of some work while we're at it too. So, it was a win-win for sure. But that's another big part of when we're doing these projects. We want to make sure it's not like a fake paint sample, it's not something that I just painted, or it's not just a bare piece of rock. It's real. I think having that authenticity is really impactful for the students as they're working and gaining these skills and this information and this knowledge, and just for their sense of accomplishment and to really empower them so they know that, like, this is the real deal. This is not just a game we're playing because you're kids. You're students and you're doing some important work. And I think they all really appreciated that. So in order to tell you all the amazing things that they did, I'm going to walk you through just the process that we, Shumla, as an organization, do when we are processing a paint sample. And again, just keep in mind, the students are doing every step of this over the course of weeks and weeks and weeks. So step one, I guess step zero really is getting the paint sample. You get the paint sample, bring it to the lab. Step one is examining it. So we have this brand new microscope, very fancy, very cool, connects to the TV so you can share what you're doing with people. We're basically just looking at the sample in whatever form it is with sterile tweezers in one hand because we want to avoid contamination, and we're removing anything that's not supposed to be there. So these rock art sites are out, they're exposed to nature. It's very easy for things to get on them. So we will very often remove fibers or hairs or cobwebs or bug shells, all sorts of nasty stuff that we do not want in there because we just want the pure, paint as close as we can get it. We don't want any contaminants. So step one is examining it under the microscope, removing that. And here are the students doing these things. Very cool to see. They had a great time. We have a great photo on social media. I can't remember when it's from, but all the scholars are like crowded around the microscope and the TV, like just having a ball looking at someone's fingerprint under the microscope. But yeah, I think they really enjoyed this like surprisingly high-tech piece of equipment. Very cool. So after examining it, removing any physical contaminants, step two is measurement. We want to know how much of the sample we have so that we can compare it to how much carbon we extract, and just for good note taking. And so here we can see Jaden working the mass balance, taking notes. We've got Juliet and Angie also taking notes. We really stress the importance of taking good notes. There's nothing more important in science. If you have to come back to it later, or if someone else has to come back to it, you need to know what you're doing. And they did a really great job at that. Steps 3 and 4, we got base treatment and filtration. So once you've removed all the physical contaminants, it looks clean to the naked eye and even under the microscope. You put it in a little tube. It is plastic, but we've tested it. There's no plastic leaking into the sample. It's not getting contaminated. It's clean. And we'll do some base treatments. We'll do some base washes to remove any contaminants that you can't see. So there are things like humic acids, which are like decayed plant remains, all these sorts of things that you wouldn't be able to see, you wouldn't be able to pick out, but the base wash removes them. And so we did this a number of times. We did a water wash a number of times. What we're looking at here is a sonicator. So it's essentially a hot water bath with these sonic vibrations that just make sure everything's getting nice and shaken up and getting all the nooks and crannies of the sample really cleaning it thoroughly. And so again, we'll do base, we'll do water. Between each of those, we put them in this centrifuge, just pop the tubes in there, it starts spinning really fast. And it's going so fast that the force of motion pushes all the solids into the outside, condenses them, makes them nice and tight so that you can pop it out of the centrifuge, unscrew the top, pour out the liquid, and the solid stays in the bottom, right where it's supposed to be. And then you pour more liquid in, do it all again. So the scholars, again, did all of this. They did filtration. You'll notice these are all instruments. There are no scholars. We were having such a good time. I forgot to take photos of them doing this, but I promise they did. The scholars, again, did every single step along the way. Some of it was difficult because we only had them for like an hour a day, sometimes only 1 day a week, but we made it through. But so this last step, filtration. At this point, we have a tube with the sample and a bunch of liquid. We just got to get that liquid out. So we pour it in here. There's a vacuum pulling the air out of the tube, out of the flask, pulling everything down and just filtering it that way onto this quartz microfilter. Once that is completely filtered through, we'll remove the quartz microfilter, put it in the oven to dry it out, get any excess moisture out of there. And at that point, it's ready for plasma oxidation. So I'm going to give you a really brief overview of our process. If you're interested to hear more about what we do in the lab or just radiocarbon dating in general, I believe there's another Lunch and Learn in the fall. I want to say September, but I'm not entirely sure. That's all about that. So you'll get to hear Dr. Karen Steelman talk about radiocarbon dating in general and the process that she has developed here to do what we do and why what we do is so unique. So be sure to check in on that. But so a brief overview. Again, the scholars up to this point have done every single step of the pre-treatment process for the purpose of plasma oxidation. And so this is what we're working with. This is the instrument that the scholars from 3 years ago built. You see here we have 10, the actual picture on top, a little schematic on bottom. We have 10 identical chambers. Each one can be sealed off with a valve. And on each chamber, there is a sample tube and then a little, we'll call it a collection tube. So that's the sample tube is what we put the paint in. The collection tube is where eventually we'll get carbon dioxide out from. So essentially how this works is it is constantly under vacuum. It's really high vacuum because we don't want anything in there that's not supposed to be in there. Again, we're really strict about contamination. And when we're ready to run, we will open up one of these gas cylinders. We'll fill the whole system with only the gas that we want at a very specific pressure. We'll seal it all off, close all the valves, and then put these this electrode system. So these, it's kind of hard to see, but this black bar in the front of the instrument has these little copper rings. There's 2 of them that fit over each sample chamber, sample tube. And there's an electric current that runs through those and bounces back and forth. And because there's gas in those tubes at a very specific pressure, it electrically excites the gas and it essentially makes a neon sign. So when it's running, especially when we're doing argon, it's really bright. It's really cool to see. This is our process for the plasma oxidation. Once we get it up and running, we let it go for about an hour. While it's running, we also, you can see these little cups in the bottom. These are filled with liquid nitrogen, and they are placed around those collection tubes. So what happens is when you have oxygen gas in here, the oxygen, again, gets excited by the electricity bouncing back and forth. The oxygen starts getting really excited. It starts bouncing back and forth as well. It's bouncing around in these chambers until eventually it is bound to hit the sample. And if it hits carbon, it'll react with that carbon to form carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide is a gas, so that's going to start bouncing around too. It's going to bounce around until eventually it's bound to hit the collection tube, which again is surrounded by liquid nitrogen. So once it gets there, it is so cold that the carbon dioxide freezes in place. It sticks to the tube and stays there, so that eventually after the hour is up, we're done with running it. We can open up all these valves, let all the extra gas get sucked out. It's all nice and clean in a vacuum, but the carbon dioxide that we want is still in these tubes trapped by liquid nitrogen. And so at that point, we can measure it, make sure there's enough. If there is, we take a blowtorch, we seal it off, we ship it out, we're good to go. So that whole process is what the scholars did. This was the coolest thing. Again, the pre-treatment has taken weeks and weeks. They put a lot of time. It's been difficult because it's a little disjointed. They, would have to take a whole week off because of sports meets, something like that. This, however, was incredible. They came here for a field trip for the entire day. They were here from 8 a.m. till 3:30 p.m. just working on this. And so that was a really cool thing to see. Before they came here, day one, forget about this. When we run this in general, day one is always going to be cleaning the system with no sample in it. Day two, when there is a sample in it, we'll start with argon, which is really heavy, but it doesn't react. So it just kind of bounces and knocks things that have adhered to the surface of the sample and knocks those off because we don't want them. And then we do the actual oxygen plasma. So essentially, day one, we did before the scholars got here. Day two is what we did when the scholars were here. So here it is, fun stuff. Fun fact, the scholars took pretty much all of these photos. They took over, quote unquote, took over our social media for the day. So very fun. But so 8 a.m., they got in and I started running the argon. I wanted to make sure that they knew what was going on. Also, it was very early in the morning and I could tell they kind of wanted to be asleep. But so I just had them take notes here and they took really great notes. Every step of the process, which valves to open, which valves to close, when to do what, when to turn on the RF generator, when to open the gas valve, all this stuff. They took notes very detailed so that I was able to start this argon plasma, the first one of the day. We let it run for an hour. And then when it turned off, I stepped off to the side, just corner of the room. And I looked to them. I said, okay, oxygen time, what comes first? And for a second, they all looked at each other and they looked a little nervous. And then eventually someone was like, do we open that valve? And someone else, yeah, I think that's it. And I said, is it? And it was. And so I said, okay, go open that valve. And so someone walked up, grabbed the wrench, opened it up. And it just continued like that for the whole process. And, they got more confident. They started being, one step ahead of each other so that whenever someone was done with their task, someone else was already ready to start the next. And they got the whole system running on their own. I was standing there supervising, watching. I think I stepped in maybe once. I think there were maybe one or two times when a student said, I think it's time to open this valve. And another student stepped in and said, oh, not yet. They were correcting themselves. They were helping each other out. And again, because they took such great notes, they ran this system like no problem. It was phenomenal. We put them in there for another week, they'd be professionals. But it was just amazing to see. And so here we have some photos of them doing these things. For some reason, again, they took all these photos. They really liked the liquid nitrogen. So that's most of the photos we have of them. But yeah, they had a great time. It was really cool to see. And they got it running. Again, we let it run for an hour. We had nothing better to do. So we threw some more atlatls. We played some card games. We got lunch at J&P, had a grand old time, got back to the lab, and it was time for measurements. So you can see them looking very pensive here. But so we started measuring the samples. If there was enough carbon dioxide, we'd get that blowtorch, seal it off. I will say this middle photo, this just for the photo op, I was the one using the blowtorch for real. It's a great photo though. And then, yeah, if we sealed it off, you can see Freddie here marking it off so we know which is which and what's inside. This was really interesting. There were, everyone had their own sample that they'd been working on this whole time. So they had a little bit of ownership over it. I think we got to the first sample that didn't have enough carbon. It was like maybe the third sample of the day, and it was the first one that didn't have enough to collect. And I think it was Isela who was working on that. You can see her. She's, whoop, I went too far. She was pouring liquid nitrogen in one of these. But Isela was the one whose sample didn't have enough carbon, and she looked so dejected, so sad. And she just, so forlornly was like, oh, did I do something wrong? I'm so sorry. And, I think it was a good moment to say, like, no, this is just the science of it. This is what happens. You can do everything right. And there's just not enough carbon. That's how it goes. We deal with that regularly in the lab. Sometimes, I think most of the other ones, actually, there is enough carbon in the paint, but there's also a lot of carbon in the background or the control. So every time we run a paint sample, we'll do an adjacent piece of rock that has no paint on it. And if there is a bunch of carbon on that, even though there's no paint, we know there's contamination. And so if there's a bunch of carbon on a paint sample, but also a bunch of carbon in their background sample, you probably can't trust those dates. You probably won't be able to get a date from them at all. And a lot of these were like that as well. And so it was another good teaching moment of, you can do everything right. It doesn't mean everything's going to go your way, but that's what science is. You're not trying to get a specific answer. You're just trying to answer a question. And the information you get is just as valuable. If someone else were to try and get dates for this site and they published a date, we could look at that and say, oh, you didn't take a background. We did, and we don't know if that's entirely reliable. And make sure that the research is advancing in an appropriate manner, I suppose. But anyway, so at the end of this process, what we're currently doing now that the scholars have finished, we're taking the samples that they collected, and we're going to take that collected carbon dioxide, ship it off to the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and the Center for Accelerator Mass Spectrometry. And I hate if any of you think I've lied to you, but these are the people doing the actual radiocarbon dating. So what we do is we prepare the samples, because you can't prepare the rock art samples any other way. We're the only ones doing it in this way because that's what you need to do. CAMs, they're the ones who take the collected CO2 and they magically get this range of dates. We would do what they do, but their machine costs millions of dollars and is the size of our building. So it might take a little while for us to get there. But so they get the range of dates, and that is eventually, what we publish. So we're kind of in this process now for these samples. Essentially, that's the end of the process here. It's also the end of the semester with the Shumla scholars. They finished just in time for graduation. We had time for like one more field trip in between, but we squeezed it in. So at the end of the year here, I think it was really a successful program. They all have said how much they loved it and how much they've gotten out of it. And I'm just really proud of them all. They did such a phenomenal job throughout the whole year, but especially on our big project at the end here. So I don't think any of them are here today, but I'd like to thank them all. And thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, hopefully we have enough time.
Oh, absolutely. We have enough time for sure. And I think we actually have few enough people that maybe we can allow people to just take themselves off mute and ask their own question.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we try to do it based on chat, but if you want to stop sharing, thank you so much, Rudy. That was really, really fantastic. And thank you from Shumla for what you have done for those students. I mean, just incredible. I see that we do have a quick first question on chat from C. Croat, and that is, how are the students selected?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, again, there's like 14 students total at Comstock, only 6 because that's as many as could fit in the car. But I think that they are the 6 with, I want to say they had the highest GPA and they asked to be in the course. I know in the past, like previous years, maybe like 2014 when it first started, I think there was an application process that they had to go through kind of separately. But at this point, it's basically just another class they can take.
Yes, that's correct. And a lot of the students have come up in the last 10 years watching the seniors get to do this, have this experience and looking forward to it. So we do try to give those that are really excited to learn and have an interest in STEM and archaeology and chemistry the opportunity. We have another question here. What sorts of projects are you thinking about for next year? What's in the works?
A good question. I don't entirely know. Dr. Steelman might have something in the back of her mind, but who knows? We might continue. I think that, again, they did such a great job working in the lab. They were naturals. They always had their safety glasses, sometimes before we did even. But we're such naturals there. I wouldn't be surprised if we did more kind of paint analysis type stuff. But it really, as far as I'm aware, with past years at least, it's kind of just like what comes up. With the greenhouse and with the cemetery project, it's just things in the community that people have wanted, or we've seen the need arise. So
that's exactly right. Yes, and if it has an archaeological or a scientific bent, then we usually focus in that area. So yeah, absolutely. We have another question. Did the students help you collect paint samples in the field?
No, I forgot to mention these paint samples were actually from Argentina. So it would have been fun. I don't think we could afford to send them all the way there. But no, so these were from Argentina. They were collected by a different researcher who works in that area and knows of our lab, knows Dr. Seelman. I mean, there might be some concerns with, because, we're already very cautious when it comes to collecting paint samples. There might be some concerns with having the students do it as well, just because it's very delicate and very delicate in more ways than one, like physically delicate, but also there's a lot of things that go into it for sure. But I mean, that really is the only step of the process that they didn't take part in. And again, it's because we already had the samples shipped to us. So
yeah. Once you mail it off, how long does it take for you to receive the data back?
Good question. Usually I'd say roughly about a month to get it back, sometimes less, a lot of times more than a month. But the CAMS facilities is very busy. They do all sorts of different kind of all sorts of radiocarbon samples. Our rock art is just one of many kind of things that they help with. But they'll also do kind of standards. We've been running a lot of standards lately. So they're busy, they're doing a lot. They fit us in when they can. If we're in a rush, they'll usually accommodate us, which is very, very kind of them. But yeah, I'd say about a month. And so if we're looking at the timeline from like when we collect the paint sample to when we get the dates back, that also is very variable. A lot of the times, if we go out to the field, collect a paint sample, we can have it ready to be plasmified within best case scenario a week, maybe 2 weeks more realistically, and then 1 more week to run it. So maybe like 2 months in total from collection to getting the date.
And we have to pay for Lawrence Livermore for every sample that we send, and we send multiple samples per paint date, because we date the oxalate that grew on the surface before the paint was laid down, the oxalate that grew on the paint, so that we can bracket the dates, and the background. So it can become a very expensive endeavor. And so we also have to be careful about how many we do and where the funding is coming from. And sometimes we have to wait for that funding, and that kind of makes the process longer. So yeah, lots of different things going into it. Other questions for Rudy?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah.
What size are the paint samples, and do the paint samples that you take vary because of color, or that probably doesn't enter the equation?
That's a great question. So most of the time when we collect paint samples, again, we're very careful about it, very cautious, and it's, again, very delicate work. We will take as little as we possibly can, and most of the time that means a flake about the size of your pinky fingernail. So like literally, that's really as much as we need. Sometimes if the paint is kind of patchy, but it's like the best place we could get it, it might be like your thumbnail instead. But it's usually as little as we can, as we know we need to take. And we are also very cognizant of where we're taking it from. So, we'll look at the condition of deterioration. If it's a figure that's really well preserved, maybe we don't want to mark it. But if it's also really poorly preserved, we don't want to risk what little you can see of it. Even if we are like, okay, this is the figure we're going to do, let's see if we can find maybe like a little nook or cranny in the rock where it won't be as noticeable. Let's try and make it look natural. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but yeah, more or
And
less.
they often select a place that's already going to fall off. So it's
Yes.
going to fall and turn to dust. So they'll specifically find areas where it can be the least impactful.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of the times, because these sites are just constantly kind of falling apart, as we say, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So
yeah. And in terms of color, as you were asking, Jim, they do digital microscopy across the entire mural before selecting the locations of paint samples, so that they can select paint samples that come from figures that are interwoven throughout the composition of the mural, so that they can basically date the entire mural with 5 samples rather than specifically just dating, this figure or that figure.
Yeah.
And then also with the color, so as far as I'm aware, the color doesn't impact how much sample we need to date, with the exception of certain black pigment. So most of the time, again, we're looking at mineral pigments where the pigment itself, the color, has no carbon for us to date, but we're looking at the binders and the saponins and the rest of the ingredients in the paint. Sometimes there is charcoal black. Charcoal is made of organic matter. It has carbon in it already. That is much more readily available. And so I believe we don't need as much when we're looking at charcoal black as opposed to the rest of the colors.
And the charcoal isn't from the Lower Pecos. Usually that's a sample from somewhere else, because we don't generally find in our murals that they used charcoal as the color. They almost always, and I would say, think I safely say always, use mineral pigment.
Yeah, it's very, very rare. And when we do see it, it's not really Lower Pecos or Pecos River style.
Yeah.
What about the samples from the accretions? Are they the same size as the paint that you take?
Yeah, for the most part, when we do, like what Jessica was saying, and we do kind of over accretion, paint, under accretion, it's usually quite literally sandwiched together. It's from the same sample. And again, it's that same sample size. That's usually only when we get really lucky and we can more easily kind of dissect a flake like that. Sometimes we're not so lucky, and so we'll make do with just the paint if that's what we that's what we can get. But yeah, kind of tangentially though, when I talked about backgrounds, control samples, and so again, we'll do that as close to the paint sample as we can get without actually being on a figure, because again, we don't want any paint on the background. But yeah, that'll be as identical to the paint sample as we can get. So, if we had to scrape off a powder instead of a flake, we'll scrape off a powder instead of a flake. Or if it's the size of your pinky fingernail, it's going to be the size of your pinky fingernail. We want it to be as identical as possible, with the exception that the background does not have paint.
It's all very scientific. I don't mean that as a joke. Like, it's really very scientific.
Put a lot of thought into this.
Yes. I think we have time for another question. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question? All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions for Rudy, thank you so much for being here. If you would like to support the Shumla Scholars Program, please go to our website, shumla.org. You can donate there. That money will go to that program and to Rudy's work and to Karen's work. And it all blends together, as you can see. The students are part of the radiocarbon dating work we're doing. Our interns do the documentation work we're doing. So all of our different programs include that as education and research aspect, like Rudy said in the beginning. So thank you so much for joining us. And we hope to see you next month.